Well, hey, everyone, and welcome to episode number 78 of the Other Six Podcast. My name is Chad Boak, and I am your host. Joining me once again in the studio, my co-host, our worship pastor, the man who always wears 2 pairs of pants when he plays golf in case he gets a hole-in-one. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Collins. Matt, how are you, sir?
How do you come up with these? You just sit around and think of them?
Yes, absolutely. Just for you, buddy. Like, you did the drum roll the last couple of weeks. I didn't get the drum roll that time. It's okay, though. Yeah. Also joining us in the studio once again, our lead pastor, Adam Bishop. Adam, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I missed y'all last week.
We
I'm
missed
happy
you
to
as
be
well.
back.
You too.
Yeah.
So shout out to Mike Hale.
I was gonna
in our
say,
church.
yeah.
He made a hole-in-one last week.
He
in
did.
golf. So
Yeah.
I saw that on Facebook.
I did as well. I sent him a text. I said, now, question, were there any witnesses there with you? Because, like, I can't think of, like, how terrible would it be if you get a hole-in-one
Right,
and there's no one
sees
there
it.
to watch,
Yeah.
right? So he said he had 3 witnesses to corroborate the story. So shout out to Mike Hale. He is a faithful listener of the podcast. And
Good
so,
job, Mike.
Good job, buddy.
And a wonderful human being.
Absolutely.
So, to make a hole-in-one, that's awesome. So
Yeah.
I have to ask the question, though. Have you ever had, like, a hole in your pants, like in an embarrassing situation, and you didn't have a change of pants with you? Like, what did you do? Did anybody run into that situation in life?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, typically, it's
Mine
just
was in
kinda,
eleof school.
Okay.
So
Well, let's hear it.
mine was
years
at
of
camp.
counseling later. Were you a student or an
No,
adult?
I was leading worship.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
yeah, we
no.
probably should not tell that story.
And I just took some gaff tape. It was
Gaff
black,
tape.
Gaff
black.
tape.
It was black
There you
pants. Black gaff tape. We were good.
That's
Okay.
really good. Yeah. Maybe once or twice in life, I think normally I was able just to kind of, conceal. So
Yeah,
I was
split
okay.
my pants right down the middle in the
Oh, did
3rd
you?
grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that was in the 80s when you couldn't get a hold of your parents. So you just had to like suck it up and deal with it the rest of the day and withstand all of the teasing. So that's how kids were raised in the 80s.
Adam's parents pick up the phone. It's like, you have a collect call from Mom, Dad, I just ripped my pants. Do you accept the charges?
Nah, he'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine. He'll
No
figure it out.
duct tape anywhere.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Didn't plan on sharing that story today, but anyway, your
fun
puns,
facts.
they never know where they'll get us.
I'm here to help. Well, so before we get to kind of this past week and our weekends and all that, Adam, we did miss you last week.
Yeah.
But you were busy serving a lot of other pastors down in Orlando. So I want to talk about that a little bit.
We went to the Magic Kingdom,
I was
and
gonna
we
say,
all walked around, and it was awesome.
Hung out at Mickey's house. Huh?
Mickey's house the whole time.
No, Orlando's a beautiful place. We did not do any of the theme parks. So there's a conference that happens down there every year. It's been happening for years. The story behind the conference is actually pretty cool, but I don't have time to get into all that. It's called Exponential.
Okay.
And there's several thousand pastors that come. I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 pastors.
That is a big conference.
And ministry leaders, you know, from all over the world, really, in every time zone. And it's hosted at First Baptist Orlando, which is a gigantic campus. And so I serve with an organization called Courageous Pastors.
Okay.
And the founder and CEO of the organization, Sean Lovejoy, preached here.
He's been
last
here before.
year.
Yeah.
Friend of Vaughn Forrest.
Love Sean.
Yeah.
Great guy.
So over a decade ago, I served on Sean's team.
Okay.
He pastored a church called Mountain Lake Church right outside Atlanta, Georgia, in Forsyth County.
Okay.
The town is called Cumming. He planted that church. That's where Jacob was born. So Jacob was born there while we lived there. And Sean he handed off the church he planted. There were about 2,500, 3,000 people when he handed it off, and started this organization 7 or 8 years ago. And really from the beginning, I've been a part of it. Just he asked me, hey, would you be willing to help me kind of get this thing off the ground and running? And when I worked for Sean, he was amazing at helping me not just learn how to be a better pastor, but how to be a better dad, how to be a better husband, how to be a better friend, how to get in shape. Like he was the one I was like, I think I need to pay for a physical trainer. And he's like, yes. So
yes, man.
He's just been a really good friend and mentor in my life. And so fast forward all these years later, we coach now 78 pastors in every time zone. Yeah, we're not coaching any pastors overseas. We tried that a couple times, and it just I tried to coach a guy in New Zealand one time. It's a little challenging.
Up at like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So we don't do that anymore. So we coach 78. I'm personally coach 3.
Okay.
So we've got a team of about 20 of us, and so the goal is one-on-one coaching. And every denomination, every size church, all the things. So at this conference, our Courageous Pastors organization, we teach workshops where they can break out, and choose. So we had 5 or 6 workshops. And so we had about 300 pastors in each of our workshops.
Oh,
and
wow.
so when we would teach these pastors, we're teaching them. I basically got up there one day and I said, I'm going to give you Vaughn Forest Church's playbook. Okay. So this is our playbook. This is how we plan things. This is how we try to go about reaching our community and making disciples and focusing on the next generation and adult ministries. And this is we talked about weathering life storms. We talked about life groups, and we used to talk about Discover Vaughn Forest.
Right.
And basically what I said was, I'm giving you our playbook, and my only request is if you run the plays and they're better, you have to come back and tell us.
That's right.
So you can help us get better too. Yeah. And so the principle there is learn and return. Yeah. That this is Jesus's church, and anytime something's happening in your church that you can share with the kingdom at large, you share it. Yeah. And so we're not getting paid to be down there. Like we're paying to be down there.
Right. Yeah.
And by saying we're paying to be down there, Vaughn Forest is paying for me to be down there, which is why I talked about this in our generosity moment in our service, because a lot of times we think, how can we reach the nations? And we're really committed to that. So we go to a lot of different places, but every now and then God gives us an opportunity where he brings the nations to us.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Vaughn Forest is, such a great church that they will send me for 5 days. And you guys, obviously, I think the church grew while I was out of town. So it's not like I'm really needed around here during the week.
No.
And I'm able to minister. And like I said, we had pastors in there from Denmark, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, on top of, pastors from all over the country. And so, we've done this for several years in a row. And I will tell you that this year just felt different. I don't know if it's the Asbury effect. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of people kind of leaning up on the balls of their feet, kind of ready to, let's go. It's time to advance the kingdom.
That's
and
awesome.
Just looking for good tools and resources and equipping and encouragement to do that. And so, it was an exhausting week, but it was a really rewarding week.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful to our church family for allowing me to make that investment. And I think it's an encouragement. I mean, you're part of the Vaughn Forest Church family. When you give, just know, like Philippians, Paul says, hey, that you're going to get credit for that. Like we're going to talk about that here in a few weeks, like in a generosity moment, but it's credited to your account is what Paul said.
Okay.
So if you've given to Vaughn Forest Church, last week was credited to your account with a global impact.
Isn't that
which
cool?
is kind of cool to think about how God's economy works.
Yeah.
And so, it was a very rewarding week, and I was grateful to be part of it.
Yeah, we kind of joke about the theme parks, but I mean, you told me your schedule at this thing. I mean, it's like up early, go until late, meeting with all these pastors. So how cool that you get to do that. That's really incredible.
And then obviously for me, I mean, the guys I'm there with that also coach pastors, I mean, there were several times that one of them would just be talking and I would pull out my phone and start taking notes. I'm like, hey, repeat that. So we learn from each other. One of the coaches is actually going to be teaching here in a few weeks at Vaughn Forest.
Okay.
Another pastor that I'm close to, and he's going to be here teaching. And so we got to hear from Nick this past Sunday. We'll get to hear from someone else here in a few weeks. And so, it was a lot of fun.
So one of the things I love that you said there is you were talking about how, like, hey, the learn and return, share the playbook. And it really goes back to one of the things we value very highly here at Vaughn Forest Church, which is cooperation. It's not our church versus, like, man, this is a kingdom effort. And I love that you get to illustrate that we get to see that, in things like this.
Yeah. 2 weeks before that, I don't know, did I talk about being with Chris Hodges on our podcast?
No, I
can't remember if I did. So a few weeks before that, I was with Chris Hodges for a day, and I'd never really spent time with him. And I mean,
lead pastor of Highlands Church.
For Church of the Highlands, and we've got a campus right around the campus, right around the corner from us. I was super challenged, just in my own walk with the Lord, and I told him, I said, when Highlands started a campus in Montgomery, I think it's one of the best things that's ever happened in our capital, because he's up in Birmingham, and so he cares deeply about the state. And there's a lot of people that are being reached here in this community, and I just said thank you, because we need Church of the Highlands, we need First Baptist Montgomery, we need Century Church, we need Taylor Road. If all of our churches were at maximum capacity this Sunday compared to the to the population at large, we're still a drop in the bucket.
That's right. Yeah.
The amount of lost people in the river region. That's so we need as many churches as possible advancing the gospel message. And then some of the secondary issues that we may not see eye to eye on, we'll set those aside, because we do see eye to eye on salvation through Jesus Christ and eternal life by Jesus, the way, the truth, and life. And so, it's been a kind of a fun kingdom impact season for me. on behalf of Vaughn Forest.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I'm glad you brought that up. That is definitely at one of our core values, how we just see the kingdom and our role in it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, so fantastic week, but then I kind of want to talk about the weekend. Gentlemen, what did you guys get up to? Matt, start with you, buddy.
We had Dee's parents in town, and I had my mom and my stepdad in, so they just kind of lined up. We
Big
hung
family
out.
weekend.
Big family weekend.
Yeah.
Sorry, neighbors. We got a little loud party at the Collins house.
I wondered what that was. I heard that around the corner.
They call the cops on you?
No.
Okay, that's good.
No, they actually came over.
There you go.
They had a party as well.
I like that.
Well, good.
Yeah, no. So yeah, we just hung out, cooked some food, played some games. So it was good.
Good deal.
What'd you do?
Well, so Christy and I celebrated our 17th wedding
Let's
anniversary
go.
on Saturday.
Hey.
Happy anniversary.
So we got we went out Friday night, went and got dinner, and it was if y'all see Christy, congratulate her on 17 years of putting up with me.
Well, that's the truth.
It's an accomplishment.
That's
true. And then in our family we have a lot of March birthdays, and so we went over and celebrated with her parents a bunch of the March birthdays Saturday night, and then yeah, so it was a pretty good weekend. Enjoyed it. Nice weather up until Sunday morning, but even then it wasn't too bad Sunday morning.
Bad.
But how about you? What'd you get up to?
Yeah, so Nick, who we're going to talk about here in a second, who shared on Sunday, Nick and his wife Laura and their 3 kids came over for dinner Saturday night.
Yeah.
So that was fun. Nick and Laura and Morgan and I have been friends for a very, very long time. But we were close. We were married for 7 years before Sam was born. And so, that would have been the season of our life that we were spending the majority of our time with Nick and Laura. And then ministry has taken us different parts of the country. And we've both had 3 kids since. So our kids had never met each other.
That's funny.
So that's kind of cool. We were able to hang out and for our kids to get to know each other. And they got a kick out of just hearing us tell stories. They were like, tell us another one, And so our wives were like, don't tell that one,
Isn't it amazing how you talk to your kids, you tell them these stories that are like, when did you become fun? It's like you have no idea how fun I was until you came
Nick
along.
And I,
anyway.
we have all kind of stories, and so
exactly.
so that was a lot of fun just to get to spend some time with them Saturday night.
Good. Well, yeah. Well, it was a great Sunday here at Vaughn Forest, and in large part due to Nick being here. Nick, a very longtime friend of Vaughn Forest. Folks probably remember him. I think it was during the COVID season when he came and we talked about some of the racial issues that we were facing. You guys,
June of 2020.
Can you believe that? Wow. That long, it doesn't seem that long ago.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
to me, it does.
Yeah.
March of 2023. I'm obviously reflecting 3 years ago, like
that's crazy,
where we were and all the things. And so he came down. He and I did that together when we were just online only.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he came back that fall to teach one Sunday.
That's right.
Believe it or not. So again, let's reflect here for a second.
Sure.
Like, you guys, y'all got to, if you're listening right now, in 2020, everybody's doing 1,000 things that they've never done before.
Right.
And all of y'all listening, like, yeah, we were too.
Yeah.
So I did not feel like I should come to anybody at any point during that year and go, hey, can you teach this Sunday?
Right.
So I just decided I that's the best way I can. Now, I can't run the technology, but I can get up there and teach. So that Sunday that Nick taught that fall was the only Sunday the entire year I didn't teach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So for all of 2020, that was the only one I didn't teach. So now, I teach, 38, 40 times a year.
Sure.
You teach quite a bit.
Yep.
We have other folks teach. But that year, that was it.
Yeah.
So I distinctly remember that weekend when Nick taught.
it was Adam finally got some rest on that weekend. That's awesome.
He's a friend of Vaughn Forest, and I was grateful that he was able to share, and he did an awesome job.
Yeah, he's just such a good dude. He walked in on Sunday morning. I saw him, gave me a big hug, man. It's just it feels like old friend every time you see him.
Mm-hmm.
So he did a great job, and I really loved his message on Sunday. I thought it was very applicable, talking a lot about trust, and so we'll start the conversation. And Nick opened up his sermon with an illustration about going skydiving. As a matter of fact, he had a video where he was going skydiving. And for our online viewers, Jonathan, let's put a little bit of that video in here right now where you can see Nick actually skydiving.
I didn't know we could do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the tech thing. Yeah.
So he was going.
It's funny because the guy's name's Wizard.
It is.
Yeah, so the gentleman that takes him skydiving, his name is Wizard.
I don't think he's ever been called a gentleman. I think you might have just said first.
The individual that took,
Wizard.
Yeah, Wizard. And he said his whole illustration was that he was trusting Wizard, this guy, to get him to the ground safely, and the Holy Spirit in that moment kind of whispered to him, like, how come you're willing to trust your life with this guy you just met, but you're not willing, to trust me with things? And all I could think of is in that moment, I would be just going like, as I'm falling to the ground, but Nick
There
is
would be
having
no thinking.
conversations with the Holy Spirit because he's a good guy. So why do
A
you
lot of
think?
screaming.
That's right. My question for you is, because I think this is a great point, why do you think it can be so difficult for us to trust God when He has proven over and over again to be so faithful?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. Yeah. I mean, so we could camp out here for a while. But a few weeks ago when we were talking about weathering the storm of our thought life, we were in 2 Corinthians. Yeah. And one of the verses we talked about was focusing our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen.
Right.
So that's the foundational reason we have a difficult time with this, is because we're too caught up in what we can see.
Oh, okay.
And so it's hard to focus on what you can't see. So if God is leading you into anything or calling you to trust Him more or challenging you to move out of your comfort zone, there's a number of different ways we could describe this experience. The very nature of that challenge is you can't see how it's going to play out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's always safer to just stay where you are and keep doing what you're doing and not go with God and not be obedient and all the different things. And I think it's part of what we have to cultivate in our faith journey is learning how to walk by faith and learning how to trust and learning how to focus not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, to focus on a God who could do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. Ephesians says, that is our God. Right. Well, that knowledge of God and that trust is cultivated through a depth of relationship.
Right.
You mentioned, being married to Christy for 17 years. Right. You thought you loved her when you married her. That love pales in comparison to the way you feel about her now.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, 17 years from now, you'll probably go, 17 years ago, I thought I loved her. Okay.
Yeah.
So we understand that principle in romantic relationships. And so when you grow in your relationship with Jesus, a byproduct of that growth is trust. And so how do I trust God more? Well, learn how to grow closer to God, and it will come a little bit more second nature to trust Him.
Okay.
If you just try to focus on trusting God and you're not cultivating a relationship, that's what actually leads to trust.
Yeah. Interesting. And I think it's easy to kind of get our eyes, you talked about unseen versus, you can see, to use the illustration we've used recently with this series, the storm. You can see the storm oftentimes, but yet God is unseen. And so I really like what you said there. I think that's good.
I mean, Nick kind of talked a lot about that, the tangible versus intangible stuff. So, you're talking about growing your, how do we grow in our faith, though, with these, like letting go of the lesser things? Because that's one of his things he was talking about. How do we grow in our faith and trust in God instead of the lesser stuff?
So I'm going to start with an answer that probably is not like where most people would start.
Okay.
But I'll say start with your calendar.
Okay.
So many times what's robbing us from that are the lesser things that are consuming our time.
Mm-hmm.
So the lesser things in our life that rob us from our time are robbing us from our life and ultimately robbing us from growing in our relationship with God. So, you can waste your life away. Mm-hmm. So a really good way to start this, like, where do I start? I don't want the lesser things to consume me. Keep a time log for a week. Just do it for 7 days. Get you a good old-fashioned notepad, legal pad. Don't try to do this digitally on your phone, for Pete's sake. Get a pen.
Right.
And literally, for an entire week, write down everything you do and how long it takes. Oh. Showers, bathrooms, brushing your teeth, feeding the dog, feeding yourself. I'm everything you do. How long does it take?
Yeah.
I looked at my phone for an email. That was only 30 seconds. I looked at my phone. I watched a show. That was 2 hours. If you'll do that for a week, and then you sit down and you look at it and you read it and you prayerfully reflect upon it, let me tell you the word that will consume you. Conviction. Conviction.
Yeah.
You will be convicted. Now I just scared everybody off from doing this, right? And what you will realize is you have all the time in the world. You have plenty of time that's being consumed by lesser things. It's going to be difficult to pursue God at a greater level, to pursue a depth of relationship, to even begin to figure out how to move forward and trusting Him by faith when your life is literally being robbed from you, not by someone else, but by how you're wasting your time.
By yourself.
Yeah. And that's what consumes lesser things.
Yeah.
Now,
so good.
And when you start to get a handle on that, you can get proactive.
Yeah.
Instead of letting life happen to you, you start happening to life.
Yeah.
Like you are now focusing on the greater things with how you live your life. And when you do that, it's amazing how infrequently you'll have to set an alarm.
Mm-hmm.
like you'll be fired up to tackle each day because you're actually doing something with your life.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about a job or productivity. I'm talking about purpose.
Yeah.
And so many times the season of life we're in can rob us from that purpose when quite simply we're the ones that are wasting it away, just focusing on, we're not even focusing on lesser things. We're letting lesser things rob our time from us.
A lot of mindless stuff too, like scrolling.
Right. Yeah. I was not expecting that gut punch today, but thank you for that. No.
Thanks, Pastor Adam.
As I think about that, I think you're 100% right, and that's going to kind of lead into my next question. So Nick's kind of central scripture was from Mark 6, and some things that just happened to the disciples. I think John the Baptist had just been beheaded before that, and so Jesus is kind of pulling the disciples away to kind of rest, to get by themselves, and then in a little bit he's going to feed the 5,000. But we'll circle back, around to that. So Jesus is pulling his disciples to him. He's saying, "Hey, come to me. You're weary. Let's get some rest." And my question is, what does that look like? Because I understand that we probably rob ourselves of a lot of time, a lot of rest, all that kind of things. But people do have busy schedules. The world is getting, seems like it's getting crazier all the time. How do we, and what does it look like to find rest in the Lord?
Dallas Willard calls it having an easy soul.
Okay.
That your soul is at ease.
Okay.
That in the midst of activity, you're not busy. In the midst of being productive, you're not stressed. That in the midst of being available, you're not stretched too thin. So there's this life that we're operating at. I got to be here, and I got to do this. I got to go to that meeting. I got to pick up this kid. And, I'm not suggesting that we, become monks and move away and not do anything. Okay, life is active.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is, you can operate in the midst of that activity with your soul at ease, with a contentment, with a peace that passes all understanding, is what Philippians says. And so that comes from the Lord, and we've all known people like that, who they get a lot done. They're not lazy, but they're not frantic. Right. They're not stressed. They're not short-tempered. They're not agenda-driven. They're still people-driven. So what's happening there? Well, there is a rest that they've basically said, okay, Jesus, if that's the offer you're making me, I want to accept that offer.
Right.
And I want to learn that side of you, and I want to learn how to cultivate that rest. Now, part of that easy soul rhythm is taking a Sabbath.
Sure.
And so, there is a rhythm to this. You have to have, a day where you do abstain from productivity being your driving force.
Right.
That's part of the cultivating a healthy soul and a healthy heart. And so, God said work 6 and rest 1. So I would say start there. If you work 7 and rest none, you're not going to have an easy soul.
Right.
If you work 4 and rest 3, you're not going to have an easy soul. You're going to feel that angst of, I'm not doing what I probably should be doing. You're not cooperating with the rhythm that God's put into place. So, there's very much a way to live this life with an easy soul, a restful soul, a peaceful soul in the midst of a whole bunch of productivity and, to steal from last series, even in the midst of a whole bunch of storms.
Yeah. And we have a saying around here, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, the idea of diverge daily? Is that what
divert daily.
Withdrawal weekly and abandon annually. So, this idea of make sure that, again, divert a little bit from what you're normally doing every day. Make sure that you're taking your Sabbath, and then make sure that you're abandoning, annually on a yearly basis.
Well, kind of going along with, Mark 6, Jesus says, "Hey, let's go to the other side. Let's go to a quiet place," right? So they get over there, and then they see these thousands of people.
Yeah, they ran ahead of them. They saw they were getting in a boat. They ran ahead of them. I just
kind of picture, this mob coming over here. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he gets over there, and it says Jesus has compassion on him. And we're talking about Sabbath. So how do we know, he stops everything, they're not going to rest, he teaches, he feeds them, right? So how do we know when God is calling us to, as Nick kind of put it, trade in convenience for inconvenience? How do we know when God's calling us to do that, and then we're just not resting on a Sabbath because we just want to work?
Again, I think I know, but I mean, what do I know? What do I know? I think most people's life is so haphazard they wouldn't even know the difference between convenience or inconvenience.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, most just shooting from the hip, making it up as we go.
Yeah.
No intentional thought, planning, or purpose, or intention or focus behind anything. So how do you even know if you're being inconvenienced.
Yeah.
Everything is inconvenient.
Right.
Everything is last
If it's
minute.
not in my-
Everything is stressful.
Yeah.
Everything is, frantic.
Yeah.
So every morning feels like the first day of school. I said that to Evergreen, my dog, this morning. I was talking with her after Sam and Jacob and Henry walked out of the door. I looked at her and I said, every day feels like the first day of school, doesn't it, Evie? And she nodded.
Yeah.
And so that's not true. Not every day, but today did. I don't know if it's because it's the first Monday after time change, but holy cow, it was
That
like the
might
first
be.
day of school.
Yep.
So where am I going with all this? I would challenge you to put into place a rhythm for your life that makes sense in the season of life that you're in. Okay? Toddlers, teenagers, married, single, empty nester. Okay, you figure it out.
Yeah.
This is big boy work. This is big girl work. You figure it out.
Sure.
Find the rhythm that works for you, and then let the rhythm over time serve you well, and then that rhythm will build in
Right.
convenience.
Right.
It'll build in healthy habits. It'll build, and then there will be times where like it's noticeably clear all of that's being interrupted
Right.
by
Right.
someone else.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you recognize it for what it is, and you're able to respond accordingly. The only example I can give is early on in ministry, we decided, Morgan and I, that I was not going to be like an ambulance pastor.
Right.
And if that offends you, I'm sorry, but like I wasn't going to be the pastor that every time there was an emergency, like I left the family table and I left the wife and I left the vacation and I left, to go do this and go do that, that we were going to work really hard to put teams in place and put rhythms in place and put structures in place. And so at every church I've served at, anytime an emergency has occurred from someone in the church, there's always been immediate care. Sometimes that's been me. Sometimes that's been
Right.
someone else.
Right.
But because we've worked so hard at that, there's only been, I don't know, a dozen times in 22 years of ministry where there was a clear inconvenience that required my immediate care and attention, and I was able to do it with full-on focus and step into that inconvenience with Morgan cheering me on.
Yeah.
Right.
With
Yeah.
Morgan saying, go, meet that need. Because that was, a lot of times, the regular rhythm is everything's just out of control.
Right. Yeah.
So it's hard to ever discern, is this actually an inconvenience?
That's right.
And we need to be inconvenienced.
Right.
Our life is not about our rhythm and our control and our schedule. And the point of all of that is to actually free you up more. That the more planning and scheduled and rhythms that you have, it actually creates more freedom to be available, not less.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that when these things pop up, it's like the college student who waits till the last day to write their term paper and got the flu. And says to the professor, I got the flu, I can't do my paper. And the professor's like, you had 12 weeks to do. If you had done the paper earlier on, you would have had the margin to get sick.
Right. Exactly.
Or the margin when someone invited you to go skiing that day to take them up on the offer.
Yeah.
So structure builds freedom, which allows you to be inconvenienced. So I would say, the question and the context and the story, let's pull back for a second and see that in the greater context of 3 years of Jesus' public ministry.
Yeah.
More often than not, Jesus pushed away the crowds to be with the few.
Right.
On the whole of his ministry, this story is actually more of an anomaly.
Very unique.
Where Jesus is actually in pursuing the crowd instead of spending time with the few. So his inconvenience is the crowd.
Right.
But because this rhythm of investing in the disciples and doing life with the disciples and we don't even know the amount of time that he spent with the disciples. That there was a clear rhythm that was being interrupted. So, I as you can see, I'm talking about this all day, and I probably am, but there's a lot to this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of us let life happen to us instead of being intentional about the gift of life that we've been given. And if you'll work on that, you can be inconvenienced and be able to meet needs for people, or at least help get the need met with someone else.
Yeah, but you have your priorities and you've prepared, all that's in place so that when it does happen, you're prepared for the inconvenience. I think that's really, really good.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, shifting gears a little bit here. After Jesus preaches and talks to the 5,000, and we know there's actually way more than just 5,000 because that's just the men, there's also women and children.
Yeah.
Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, feed them. And the disciples in this moment, kind of freak out. And I think it's easy for us to kind of throw stones at them going, well, why would you freak out?
Nick said they got really good with the facts.
That's right. Really good with the facts.
Love that.
And they immediately go like, we don't have enough money. Like, how are we going to do this? Like, it's going to take a long time, all of that kind of stuff. And so Jesus is asking them to do this really big task. And even though Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do, he's asking them, and they kind of freak out. But they had everything that they needed in Jesus there to accomplish his task. So I guess my question for you is, we probably have someone or multiple someones listening to this podcast right now who feel like God is calling them to something, maybe something in their personal life, something in their work life, and they don't feel like they can accomplish the task. Maybe they don't feel like they have everything they need for that task. What would you say to that person?
Well, you know what's crazy about all this is Jesus looked at his disciples later on and said, hey, it's better for me to leave you.
Right, yeah.
And I'm going to send my helper, the Holy Spirit. And so that's who you have if you're a Christ follower. And so we would think, man, if I was in a situation, it'd be awesome to look and have Jesus standing right next to me and go, okay, I got Jesus with me. Let's go. Jesus said, nope, it's actually better for me to be seated at the right hand of the Father and for the Holy Spirit to be in you. Yeah. So we have to first start there. Like you have the exact same thing the disciples had that day. Okay, so you have that. Mm-hmm. And so you're asking me, what would I tell somebody who they think God's calling them to something they don't feel equipped for? They don't feel like they can do it? Okay, well, you need to discern that that's really God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, is that really God? I've been wrong before. Like I've thought God was leading me into something and got into it and went, oh boy, I missed God on this one.
that was all me.
I missed God on this one. Now, what was the mistake and the principle that I pulled from that is I can easily, and this the specific example I'm thinking of happened when I was in college. Like I was really hoping that God would lead me in a direction that I wanted to go. Sure. So I kind of manipulated the situation. I didn't run it past anybody. I had a quiet time and heard clearly from the Lord. That's a bad plan, you know? Right. So, you know, the discipline now is when I sense that, I do have men of God that I run that past.
Yeah.
And more oftentimes than not, the answer that I get is that is probably from the Lord, but the timetable on that probably isn't at all what you want it to be.
Yeah,
that's probably going to be way down the road or years from now, and I'm like, I want it now.
Yeah,
I'm like a 2-year-old.
That's where I mess up is the time frame because I'm like now.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I would tell them. Okay, like Holy Spirit's in you. Mm-hmm. Second thing, is this really God? So help me understand how you reached the conclusion that God.
Yeah.
Well, I had a quiet time this morning. Okay, we got some work to do, but like I've taken, I ran this up the flagpole with some men or women of God. The third thing I would say is what Nick started the message with. What are you holding on to right now that you will have to give up in order to go?
Yeah.
So before you tell me what you're not, tell me what you're clinging to.
Yeah.
Is it a house? Is it a title? Is it a place? Well, what is it?
Yeah.
You know, someone says, I really think I want to serve in ministry as long as it's within 2 hours of my parents. Well, I'm not so sure that's how the New Testament reads.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that part of that is the convenience. We have to release the convenience.
Right.
We have to. So are you willing to give something up? Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to say, okay, so now what is not currently in your life that needs to be in your life in order for you to be faithful to obey what God's telling you to do? Is it something you need to learn? Is it an experience you need to attain? Is it a degree you need to get? Mm-hmm. Is it a job you need to get? Is it, very seldom in life does God, you just move you from A to B.
Yeah.
God gives you a picture of where he'd like to take you. And then it's quite a journey to actually get to that point.
Yeah.
And, I'm reminded of being at multiple college graduations over the year, multiple high school graduations over the year. Yeah. And I get it. I mean, no one wants to hear a high school commencement speaker say, 3 months from now, you're going to be in class again. Like that doesn't really inspire anybody.
Right.
But it's true.
It's true, yeah.
You're not changing the world right now.
Yeah.
You're taking the next step.
Right.
Yeah. You get out of college, we're going into the workforce with all these wonderful ideas. Probably not. No. You're probably taking the next step in your journey.
Right.
And so that's how most things work. You have a picture of what could be, and now you got to take the next step in your journey to get there.
Yeah.
And so, yes, if God's leading you to something, all right.
Yeah.
But it will be a journey. That's the only guarantee I can give you, is it will be a journey. You won't go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But there are some things along the way that you got to be mindful of. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does.
There's a lot more
does.
to it. That's kind of just my initial thoughts.
No, I think that's really good. I'm about to ask you to speculate here,
right.
and so going into this, I'm going to ask you to speculate what Jesus was thinking, and so I understand going into it that it's a
It's dangerous.
We're putting a disclaimer on this. So, Jesus asked the disciples to feed them, and then they start giving reasons as to why not. What do you think Jesus was wanting from them in that moment? Like, what would the correct response would have been from the disciples in that moment when Jesus says, "Go feed these guys"?
The one they gave.
I don't think there was a correct response.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, in fact, I would tell you that I think that's exactly what Jesus was trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wouldn't necessarily say that there was a failure here.
Okay, good.
Again, these guys are in process of figuring out who Jesus is
Right.
in real time.
Mm-hmm.
If any of us had been there, maybe we would have probably been reacting the same way.
Sure.
So
100%.
we got a lot more information than they had.
Yeah.
But I will say this. There are some lessons you can only learn through failure. There are some lessons you can only learn by realizing you're not adequate. You don't have what it takes, despite what the world tells you.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have what it takes.
Yeah.
You go out on your own without God's guidance, without God's power. You got it all figured out. You're smart, and you fall flat on your face. Man, that's a helpful lesson to learn. There's other times you're following God, but you get ahead of God. God's not on your timetable, so you decide to speed the timetable up.
Right.
And all of a sudden, failure.
Yeah.
There's other times where God's provision isn't happening in the timetable that you need it to happen, and so you try to do something to manufacture that provision. And so I think the principle there for us is when you mess up, when you fail, when things don't go the way that you'd hoped they would, those have been some of the most valuable lessons for me over the
learn
years.
from it.
Yeah. So you can learn lessons from success, but you can also learn lessons from failure. And so I think in many ways, the sequence of that conversation played out exactly the way it needed to.
That's good.
Because Jesus knew there was going to be a day where that he would not be around and they would be facing a similar situation, and he needed them to remember this day.
Right.
And so, remember. And so I think that everything about how Jesus was leading the disciples was super strategic.
That's cool.
In preparation for what he knew he had called them to.
Yeah.
They didn't realize what he had called them to. So I think all of these stories, that's the end game. He's preparing them for what's ahead of them.
That's good.
I love the little doggy bag. He's
Yeah.
like 12.
The disciple doggy bags. Yeah.
That's
that
great.
was so cool.
That was good. And he said he gave him a carb and a protein.
That's right.
I loved it.
Well, let's talk about the boy that gave up, his lunch to feed the people there. He said that God doesn't need our help, but then that he deliberately restrains his work for us to participate, right? So why do you think that God works like that, where we have to participate and he just doesn't go, "Oh, well, you don't want to participate? Here you go. I'm going to do it myself." So why do you think he chooses to operate that way?
Well, I do think he operates that way sometimes. Like,
Okay.
I don't think God accomplishing his purpose has anything to do with my obedience.
Yeah.
I don't think God accomplishing what he wants to in the river region really has anything to do with Vaughn Forest.
Yeah.
I think God's going to do what God wants to do, and if we want to get on board, he'll use us. If we don't, he'll just go right around us and find a church that will be available.
You talk
for him
about
to
setting
use.
yourself. You use that.
Yeah. So I think God is searching the world, the Old Testament says, to and fro.
Yeah, to and fro.
For those whose hearts are fully committed, dedicated, loyal to him, for who he can act on their behalf.
Yeah.
That's the closest thing to a life verse I have.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of the whole life verse thing, but that's about the closest I've got.
Okay.
I want to be one of those that's counted among that number.
Yeah.
That God stopped and said, all right, his heart is given to me. So I would say God is going to do what God wants to do, whether we get to be involved in that process or not. So I think we have to always just remember that.
Yeah.
Now, why is it that God goes about using us the way that he does use us? And what's the purpose behind that? I think a lot of people don't want to give up what they currently have.
Yeah.
And I love Nick drawing attention to the fact that it's hard for a little kid to give up their lunch.
He's talking about, was it a Lunchable?
Yeah, it was Lunchable.
Yeah, Nick and I both shopped in the Husky section as middle school kids, and so we kind of leaned more on the heavier side. So yeah, I share that. You weren't getting food from me. Ain't no way.
No, right.
I'd give
my
you
Lunchable.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you my shirt before I give you my sandwich. And so
I'm not gonna give you my cosmic brownie, man.
Yeah. Oh man,
now
come
we're
on. Now we're
talking.
talking.
Yes.
We should have a poll, the best little Debbie, kind of all those unhealthy things that we ate in the 80s. But
cosmic brownie's up there.
It's up there.
Anyway.
Look,
what were we talking about? Okay, so yeah, giving those things up. I don't think that we want to give things up. I also think that it is in all of our nature to focus on what we don't have rather than what we do. You're only required to be faithful, and you're only held accountable for what you have, not for what you don't have. So this little boy didn't have a lot.
Yeah.
But what he had, he gave to Jesus, and that was all Jesus needed.
Yeah.
And so many times in life we think, well, once I get to a certain income level, or once I get to a certain status, or once I have a certain amount of influence, or once I get married, or once I become a parent, we add a disclaimer to when we will finally be available or release what's in our hands. Yeah. And God says, no, right now.
Yeah.
Where you are right now, whatever you've been entrusted with is all I'm asking for, period.
Yeah.
And, we follow that principle here as a church. Like we don't focus as leadership in our church on what we don't have. We focus on what we do have. Look what God has entrusted us with. Isn't this amazing?
Yeah.
And so we focus on that. And again, at the conference last week, that was one of the things I focused on with a lot of these pastors. Like, let's not talk about what you don't have. Let's talk about what you do have.
Yeah.
And so I think in your life right now, like, what is it that God has entrusted you with? Do you truly see yourself as a steward, or are you so wrapped up and holding on to it so tightly that it's actually become an obstacle to keep you from moving forward?
Yeah.
Here's the only thing I know. When God called you to move forward, you always have to give something up.
Yep.
You always have to give something up.
Yep.
Sometimes it's safety, sometimes it's comfort, sometimes it's position, sometimes it's influence, sometimes it's proximity to family. Sometimes it's income. Sometimes it's a car you really like. Sometimes it's having to move away from your favorite sports team, heaven forbid. But like anytime, like there will be a cost.
Right.
If God moves you forward, it will cost. It will cost you friendships, relationships. People will say things about you that aren't true.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what this is.
Yeah.
And that's a long list I just routed off. No wonder most people go, good.
I'm out.
I'm good. Yeah.
I was good until that.
Just stay, right here,
I was
Lord.
good until the sports
I'll
team.
keep my fish and my loaves in my pocket, and we'll just go to church on Sundays.
Yeah.
So that's why.
He could have just kept quiet, right? Yeah.
That's why it's hard for a lot of people to go, okay, because now, guess what? Surprise, surprise, surprise. It actually gets harder.
Yeah.
It's going to be harder.
No, that's really good. So I really liked how Nick said that Jesus satisfied their souls and then their bellies. So he taught them and then he fed them. And this was a very practical thing that he did here in serving them. And, it's one of our core values here at Vaughn Forest Church, serving with no strings attached. So can we talk about the importance of practically serving those around us? What does that look like for us kind of in our everyday lives? Like we have these big service projects we do as a church, but just daily, what can that look like?
Yeah. I think that this is probably an opportunity to talk about global poverty.
Okay.
Probably wasn't what you were asking for, but
no, it was exactly.
I think it's tough to accept that here we are in 2023 in global poverty. And when I talk about global poverty, I'm talking about global poverty that keeps people from being able to have food.
Right.
Yeah.
That we're still there.
Yeah.
For as much progress as we've obtained as societies and cultures and nations and different things. But for most of the world, that's their reality. So that's why our family, we sponsor, 3 boys. They're all the same age as Henry, and they all live in the same village in Peru. I was trying to get down there to see him in May, and unfortunately, there's been a lot of insurrectionists in Peru that are taking over the airports.
Oh, really?
And so it's not really the best time to travel to Peru. And Compassion is actually not sponsoring any trips to Peru. I've been on the phone with them over the last month trying to convince them otherwise, but they've pretty much said,
wow.
Yeah. We've talked to a couple of folks that we have contacts with and other mission organizations in Peru. And so I'll get down there to see them eventually. But I know they're getting fed each month.
Yeah.
through compassion.
Yeah, that's right.
So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about Compassion International is they are meeting the most basic needs that exist globally, and they're doing it through a local church. So when these 3 little boys that we sponsor, and our church sponsored close to 200 kids in the same village, a year and a half ago, when you're fed there, when you're given clothes, when you're educated, and the local church becomes the center of all these things, it opens up your heart to Jesus a lot more. It's difficult for someone to receive the good news of the message when they're dealing with hunger pains. And so when Jesus feeds their soul and their bellies, there's a real principle there for us that, when we think about how do we take the gospel to the ends of the earth, there's a lot of people in the earth right now that the good news of the gospel message is the last thing on their mind because they're starving. And so we've got to figure out, and it's one of the reasons, again, I'm so passionate about the next generation. I think they'll figure it out. I think that the next generation are the ones that understand how to leverage technology and raise funds and start this business and do all this and figure out that. And hey, what happens with the food that gets expired in grocery stores, even though technically we could probably still eat it, but the FDA, and they start thinking and they start distributing. And so I have great hope in that. But let me then say this. Everything I just described exists in Montgomery County. You don't have to go to Peru.
Oh, wow.
I've walked some of the streets in Montgomery County that the houses have no utilities, they have no running water, they don't know where their next meal is going to come from, and it's very real, and it's in our community. I was in a meeting with the superintendent of our Pike Road schools and talking about the number of kids just in our Pike Road schools that are on government-sponsored meals. And so there are real needs all around us that I believe part of being a Christ follower is that we've been called to meet people where they're at. Jesus says, if you give a cup of cold water in my name, here's your meal, here's water. Now here's clothing, here's school supplies. Now let's start talking about Jesus. But there's a big principle there that you've got to meet people where they're at. And for some people, the need isn't how to have a better marriage. The need isn't how to lead your teenage kids. The need is I'm hungry. I'm hungry. And so we have that need here locally, which is why, again, Reality and Truth. We go downtown once a month on Tuesday nights. We partner with, like I mentioned, with Pastor Ken Austin and Mercy House and some of the other things that we do. And then obviously globally, we're trying to make a difference there as well. And we've got the trip to Mexico where we build house. And so, we're one little church, but we're not going to ever let that be our reason for not doing something. We're just one little church. Is it really going to make a big difference? Of course it's going to make a big difference because it's what we've been called to do. And so we're going to step into that. But, don't miss the principle there that they left full. And I think that that's part of what it looks like for us to be Christ followers as well.
That's good.
Well, ultimately, Nick's message was about surrendering, that we surrender our lives, all we have to Jesus and all we are to Jesus. And then he made a point, he said that Jesus did that for us first. So let's talk about what that looks like to live a life fully surrendered to Jesus.
Well, you're not going to do it. I mean, one of the
wow, thanks, Adam.
One of the greatest lies that was ever penned in the hymn book is "I surrender all."
Oh, but it's a great song.
Fantastic song. It's just a lie.
Shots fired. I like it.
It's just a lie. Actually, because of what Jesus did, that's not even a requirement. So you're saved by grace through faith. Jesus, surrendering all biblically is I am giving up. I can't get to God. I'm surrendering my life. And so that's the point of the song, which is why we sang it in the invitation in the church I grew up, because that's when people got saved.
A lot of people got saved with that.
As long as we're talking about the song that way, good to go.
Okay.
The moment we apply that song to our sanctification, not so much.
Okay.
I hold on to areas of my life every single day.
And
so do you, and so do you, and so does everybody listening. And so our sanctification is the process of relinquishing control of the entirety of our life. That Jesus saves our life, and then we try to recapture it one day at a time back from him. And so the idea that all areas of my life are surrendered to Jesus at all times is actually not true, and that should produce brokenness and conviction of my life. That the person who purchased my life, in some way, I'm now saying I can actually lead that, manage that better than you can, Jesus. Or I'm going to let the sin of my past keep me from moving forward, which is basically then looking at Jesus on the cross and saying it's not good enough.
Wow.
So there's this dynamic of surrender that occurs at salvation, and then this process of continuing to surrender one day at a time, and not letting yesterday's victories be enough for today, this constant surrender. And then one day in our resurrected bodies, we will be fully surrendered to God for all of eternity. But the reason why that matters so much, someone says, that's great. It sounds like you're just preaching the Bible. Like, why? Why? What's the point? Like, why does that matter?
Yeah.
Because it's only through a life of surrender that you experience freedom.
Yeah.
So you were rescued and redeemed and saved so that you could experience freedom from sin. You were enslaved to sin.
Right.
Surrender is the only way you move further and further away from that enslavement, the old sin nature. And so the benefit for you listening is nothing about your life can control your life because you've surrendered your life to Jesus. Your past, a particular substance, thoughts, other people's opinions. Like, let's just go through the categories of all of the things that typically control our lives.
Yeah.
A fully life surrendered. In fact, it was Moody who said, D.L. Moody said, the world has yet to see what could happen with a life fully surrendered to God.
Yeah.
And so like that he got it. He's like, we have not yet seen what God could do through a fully surrendered person. And my kind of pushback to D.L. Moody, which who am I to push back to D.L. Moody, would be, well, we saw that through his son. Jesus.
I was about to say that.
But so I think it's a good discussion. Maybe at some point we can even unpack further between the justification that occurs at salvation through surrender, and then the ongoing sanctification of daily surrendering.
Advocating for you.
Through the power of the Holy Spirit and what that looks like and the process that entails. And that in and of itself is really what discipleship is. Discipleship isn't a class you attend. Discipleship is the ongoing process of surrender. So it's not easy. It's work.
Like, and that too. And that
one
too.
How about that area? How about that? No, I'm keeping that.
That's good. You gave that one. Now this one.
Now about this. So
constantly letting go. That's good. I like
that. So if you like the song "I Surrender All," I hope I didn't offend you. But I was trying. We're getting towards the end of the podcast. People start nodding off. They're running off the road.
I
needed to jar them a little bit.
I had to wake them up.
You jarred me
back.
a little bit, man.
I jarred Matt. Sorry,
Matt. Wait, what?
Well, that is a good place
Matt's
for us to.
We're doing it this Sunday.
We're doing it this Sunday and every Sunday.
There you go. That is a good place for us to kind of wrap up the podcast today. I thought this was a great conversation. Again, Nick did an incredible job this past Sunday, and appreciate you kind of shining a little bit more light on what he said, giving us some commentary on what he preached on.
Can we do a 30-second preview of Sunday?
I would love that.
All right, we're kicking off a new series called Broken Crowns. We stole the title from a book written by Pastor Chris Bell down in good old Mobile, Alabama.
Three Circle
Church. And so he wrote this book, 4 or 5 years ago, about Old Testament kings.
Yeah.
And we typically know like the headliners, Saul, David, Solomon, but there's some other guys. And so we're just going to take a few weeks and talk about some of these other guys from the Old Testament and some of the lessons, the good lessons, some of the bad lessons. So we'll spend a little time in the Old Testament, talk about some Old Testament kings. It's going to be fun.
It'll be good. Be a good series,
and we're not just going to read Chris's book to you. Like we're actually going to teach the Bible.
It's good.
But when we find a good title from a book, we will rip it off so fast you won't know what happened. And they'll tell you to buy his book to support his ministry and feed his children.
That's exactly right. So that'll be this Sunday, 9:30 and 11 o'clock. Join us here on campus. Lots of great things happening. I know we got a couple of baptisms lined up for the Sunday as well. Should be worship's going to be fantastic as always. So looking forward to a great Sunday here at Vaughn Forest Church.
I surrender all.
That's right. If for some reason you cannot join us, you can always join us online at vaughnforest.com at 9:30 and 11 a.m. So we appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Other Six Podcast. On behalf of Adam Bishop, Matt Collins, sound guy Jonathan, and myself, we will catch you guys next time.